The Raymarine Autopilot is conceptually quite simple. It sits between the tiller and a mount point on the side of the cockpit. It has a ram that can move in and out of the unit to adjust the tiller, point the rudder in the right direction, and steer the boat. The components inside are a compass, a logic circuit board, the ram to move the tiller, and a motor to drive the ram.
Faulty Raymarine Autohelm ST1000. So let's pop it apart, see what the situation is. So, screws out.
I start by removing the 8 screws that hold the two sides of the unit's case together. I pull the unit apart to begin the investigation. The Autohelm stopped working a few weeks ago. I could hear the motor whirring, but the steering ram remained stationary. To allow me to test the unit, I needed a 12-volt power supply. So I took an old Dell laptop power supply unit from a long gone laptop that outputs 19.5 volts. I attached a DC to DC voltage regulator from eBay that will accept a range of voltages from 12 to 30 volts and output 12 volts DC. I also got a power meter to display voltage, current drawn, and power.
I'm going to use this to test. Yeah, I think I've got this bridge wrong. I think maybe this one needs to be up here. Try that. So this one on common. There we go, 12.05 volts. Right, just rearrange stuff a bit so you can see what I'm doing. So this is the output of my power supply. I'm just going to attach the negative terminal to this motor and just touch on the positive. And immediately there's movement either way in this, but if we reverse the terminal so the motor spins in the other direction. So the spindle of the motor is just spinning in the gear. So there's our problem. We have 1, 2, 3 screws to take out there, and then this piece is just sat in. I don't see any screws holding it in. I think it's held on by the pressure of the upper case. But if we can, and then I think we need to take these parts to separate these gears out, and then we can get at this, which is just spinning on the motor spindle, and hopefully. So we'll put my screwdriver, there it is. We've just got
I take the screws out, then remove the rubber seal. With the circuit board moved out of the way, the ram and motor assembly lifts clear. Then I remove the 4 screws holding the gearing together. With the screws removed, the gearing pulls easily away from the ram.
okay, so again I just move this out of the way so we can get this more in shot. So as we can see, I don't know if you can see, this is just
Examining the motor gear on the end of the shaft, I spot it is turning freely on the motor spindle when it should be tightly attached.
No real clue. Okay, this one lifts out.
I lift the belt and pulley out of the way to gain free access to the motor spindle and gear to allow repair.
So I'll start. Dog barking in the background.
The spindle and gear
Watching
will
directly,
need
I thought
degreasing
for
to let
turning
the
on my
adhesive bond
glasses,
correctly.
my
So I use an
night
alcohol
glasses, as it
wipe
were.
to remove any contaminants from the motor shaft
But
and
it
interior
doesn't do a
of the
good
gear.
job at degreasing other things. So let's just get one of these out and finish up. Okay, so this Loctite 638.
I'm using Loctite 638 to bond the spindle back to the gear. I squeeze a little onto the shaft. Then a little into the gear. Assemble and I clean it up with a tissue.
Here, and you can see it pushing it out. Try to the end. Tissue head.
I left the
So this
glue
has
to
been
cure overnight
sat
and
me
came
for
back to a good solid bond.
24 hours. Reassemble the unit. Okay, so first things first, we need
Now
to
to put the unit back together.
pop this back on. So this goes around
I reassemble the reduction gear and belt. Then I line the motor assembly up with the ram assembly and finally screw it together. Reassembly is the reverse of taking it apart. Here we see quite clearly the compass that attaches to the circuit board. Now we just need to get the ram back in the case, not forgetting the seal. I spend a bit of time making sure everything is seated correctly and lined up before I go round and make sure the seal is also seated correctly.
so as previously, I'm just going to put
At this point, I want to ensure that the ram moves back and forth with the motor and that my repair has worked before I finally reassemble the unit, take it down to the boat and test it. So that one wound it in a little bit. I'm just going to reverse the polarity and see what happens. And there we go. Out she goes.
That definitely moves outwards. I'll just wind her back in. Oops, everything. And there we go. Okay, so now we're confident that the mechanics are all working and everything's back together. We need to reassemble the unit, so make sure the seal is seated correctly all the way around. So we should have an operational unit.
To get to the boat in the new marina, I have to take a tender and row across to our pontoon.
A bit blowy here, so the mic might be terrible, but this is the opportunity to test the repaired Autohelm on the boat. I'll just quickly rig it up. Okay, so the rudder facing forward. This piece locks into there, and then this piece, see that, goes on the pin there, and then the ram can control it. Yes. So we've got this 3-pin plug and socket that we have to hook up. Swing that round. Right, so immediately the unit comes to life, and we can see we've got a display here, and it's saying 141 degrees. So if you look round at the compass, that's on about 135-ish. So allowing for a bit of variation, yeah, it's 140, that's about right. So it's in standby at the moment. We put it on auto. We now have the ability via these buttons to alter the heading by 10 degrees, so plus 10, and it steers the boat to attempt to get there, and minus 10, it steers the other way, minus another 10, put it in standby. So initial tests indicate that she works. I need to go out for a sail and check